Welcome to the Care for the Caregivers webinar series. Today is part 2 of our two-part series called Encouraging Independence. Enjoy!
Welcome, caregivers. Today we are going to talk about part 2 of Encouraging Independence. Just like in part 1, we are very honored to have Dr. Fishy join us and Dr. Saya join us. Both of these women are independent women who have, amazing academic careers and are in the field of therapy and are very transformational when it comes to talking about encouraging independence and really wanting parents, caregivers to encourage independence early with the people that they are raising. So we're very, very thrilled to have you guys here again. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I was somewhat familiar with the first 2 aspects of independent living that you covered last week, but this week I am like a complete novice and excited to learn about what you guys are going to teach today. So thank you and welcome.
Thanks for having us. We will go ahead and jump right in. For anybody that joined us last week, we're going to do a quick overview just for anybody that's new about independent living, and then we'll jump into the 3 principles we didn't cover in the last webinar. So what is independent living? Independent living is a philosophy, it's a movement, and it's focused all on empowering individuals with disabilities to live independently, to have control over their own lives, and just like anybody else in our community, be free to make their own decisions and advocate for themselves. Independent living essentially means that we have the same choices and control over our everyday lives as a non-disabled person, and that we as the disabled individuals are the experts on our own life. So we should be included in decisions and get to live out our lives the way we want to. Tone, anything to add? This is Ed Roberts. He's who we consider the father of independent living. He opened the first Center for Independent Living in 1972 after being told that he wasn't going to be able to go to college. He had polio, and originally they told him that they couldn't accommodate him in a university setting, and he advocated. He ended up going to Berkeley, and then from there opened our first independent living center, and now we have them nationwide. And he
real quick though, Gab, just to be real clear, right? Independent living centers, it's not just about disabled people being in control, but they're run by and for disabled people. So there's disabled people in leadership roles. It's not, it again challenges the narrative, the historical narrative of non-disabled people telling us what we need and what's best for us. So it's run by and for disabled people. And I think that that's a really important point.
Yeah, super important. And that's actually, it's actually mandated too, which make them different. They have to be run by disabled people.
Which means the majority of their staff and the people in leadership roles have to identify as disabled.
Yes. And so with that, we'll jump into the independent living principles we're going to cover today. Trying to move us out of the way. But today we're going to focus on consumer control, community integration, and advocacy. And you can see the last webinar we did last week. That'll also be up on the website where we go into detail about the other 2. And we had a lot of fun with that as well.
So consumer control, it's very clear based on the title. It means the consumer, the disabled person, is in control, right? The power, authority, and responsibility over your own life, right? The consumer is in the is in the driver's seat to make decisions and has power and authority over their own life. And again, I think that it's very tied to something that we discussed last week, is informed choice, which is the ability to make choices based on information, right? And consumer control would say that based on that, right, disabled people have the right to make choices, and they are in the driver's seat. And I think that this is important because in society, sometimes we think we know best for disabled people, especially as parents, or if we've been around them for a long time, we think we understand and know them best. And it's important to build in strategies in your everyday life and ways to make sure that your child can have some control and be in the driver's seat. And that is very tied to choices. So not just assuming because your kid eats cereal every day that they must want cereal for the 5th day in a row. Even if that's true, we want to give them the power to make the decision, to have the authority to say, you know what, no, actually, I'm not feeling cereal today. I'm feeling oatmeal, which would be true for, this level of control would be absolutely well respected in terms of non-disabled children. So it's important that we would do the same thing for disabled children as well.
So as Tony said, it's really about examining who's in control. And one of the sort of guiding principles that I think illustrates this really well is nothing about us without us. And it's this idea, as she said, that the disabled individual, especially when we're making decisions about their life and what that's going to look like, should be involved. So how much say do they have in their day-to-day decisions? Self-determination is another big one. So being able to make those decisions, but also knowing you're empowered to do so, right? So it's one thing to say, give them the choice, but if they've never been given choices or never been included on that level, they're not going to know exactly what to do with it. So it's important that we're instilling those skills as early as possible, and that their voice is being encouraged, so that they know their opinion matters. Go ahead, Tom.
So nothing about us without us is actually the disability rights mantra, right? It's this comes up in a lot of discussions about disability rights, and again, it challenges this notion that historically we've been told what's okay, what's best for us. It also reclaims this idea that we know our experience best. So it seeks to dismantle the hierarchy between the professional and the disabled person. And I think that's really important. And it's really important to think about not only like do they have the opportunity to make decisions, but when they make decisions, are they listened to? Or like I watch a lot of people give choices in a way that's very leading, and so then it's not really giving a true option, right? It's like, it's like if you sell to a kid an apple or a chocolate bar, right? It's like, unless your kid is super into like fruits, they're gonna want the chocolate bar, right? And so we have to make sure we're giving options in a way that they can make decisions and also make choices. So you have to instill that early on.
Right. If we don't honor the choices they're making, there's not going to be much power behind their ability to make choices.
And if we frequently give them choices, but we don't listen, then they're going to learn that their opinion doesn't matter, that they're not the expert. And then they're going to, there's no like magic age. I sometimes think that there's this like misconception that there's this magic age of when that people should be quote unquote independent. And it's like, if you haven't instilled those qualities, you can't expect the person to turn a certain age and then boom, be making all the choices if they've never made any choices, right? You have to instill that. You have to ask and listen. And this means that their choices and their opinions may be inconsistent with what you as the parent believe. And that's okay, right? I think that that's really important. So this is kind of like one of my favorite things, and Judy Heumann, who's an amazing disability rights activist and well known in the movement, says independent living is not doing things yourself, it's about being in control of how things are done. I think that this is a real shift in the way we view independence, because again, non-disabled people get help from people all the time, and it's totally warranted and we totally support it. Like if you plan a party, right, you get support, right? You get catering, you get somebody to do the music, right? You're not trying to take it all on, right? You put the experts in charge of their role. But sometimes when we think about disability, we think that independence means that the child or the person must do it on their own. And I would challenge that, and it's really about, even if they're getting help and support to do it, are they being in control of how things are done? And I think that that's a really important distinction, that you need to see the shift, that independence is about being in control and not just, okay, well, you're doing it on your own. So, and that's the gold star. The gold star should be who's in control of it. And again, tied to that consumer control. I think I shared last week an example of one thing that I get support in is washing my hair, right? But I'm still in control of how it's done. I don't sit in the chair and throw my hands up in the air and say, do whatever you want. I go to the person that I have a relationship with, right? So I'm in control of it. And there are other examples. I don't know if you have any, Gab.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think particularly in the parenting space, one that I see a lot and that I probably have talked about on one or two of these webinars before is your kids have a lot of interactions with either caretakers or therapists or different family members that are helping them with different tasks. And especially if we've done it every day, right, over and over and over. So you've helped your kid get dressed every day, or just like faster if you do it on your own, or you just, you're rushing and you're getting it done. We don't always include them in those everyday processes, and they should be in control of those things, even if they're not doing it 100% on their own. And I think it's important to mention, just because a lot of kids have a lot of different caregivers and aides and helpers, they should also be empowered in those spaces to say if they want something or don't want something, appreciate something or don't appreciate something. And I think sometimes we create the narrative of, you just got to take the help you can get. So this kind of reframes that a little bit.
I think it's also too, it's I see a lot of I see a little bit of control in terms of like what to wear and what to do, but also know that the scheduling is control. All because you're ready to help your child at 3 p.m. doesn't mean that they're exactly ready. And I get, as parents, we have schedules, and we, and at some level, right, your child may not be able to manage an entire schedule, but we need to build in flexibility into the routine, because when they're an adult, right, they're going to be in control. It's not going to be like, well, come whenever you want to help me use the restroom, or come whenever you want to help dress me, right? Like, they're going to have to schedule this. They're going to have to be in control of the schedule if they're going to need help and support. And that same skill is going to happen if they need to schedule a doctor's appointment, right? And so it's really important you don't call up the doctor and just say, never look at your own calendar, right? You look at your own calendar and you plan accordingly, right? So again, that's a form of control. So I think we don't want to lose that for disabled folks.
The next one is community integration. And this is the idea that you can live and participate fully in all aspects of life and in your community. I think a lot of times for parents, especially of younger children, this can be a little bit more challenging because it's like, well, if they're going to participate and they're going to do activities and they're going to do things, it's going to be different, or they can't always be included in certain things with certain people and different things. And what this principle talks about is really, and we'll talk about living integrated as well, but really integrating into your community, your society, and being an equal part, just like any other kid their age. And we'll get into some examples on the next slide, but
it also goes past this idea of just inclusion, but integration. So it's not just about can you get to the table, but once you're at the table, can you fully participate? Which I think is a very different thing. I think sometimes we're sold this lie, well, we have ramps, we have, ASL interpreting, we have, we have large print. So, come to the table, right? But coming to the table is different than being able to fully participate and integrate with your peers as valued members of your community, right? Because here's the thing, society still doesn't really expect us to be in the community or as valued members of the community. So we have to challenge that, right? And
I see this a
it's
lot.
getting better, but we're still a long way to go.
Yeah, there's a long way to go. And I see this a lot when I help parents in IEP meetings specifically, right? So special ed classrooms can be notorious. P.S. I would also like to rename special ed, but that's a whole nother conversation. They can be notorious for, while your kid is in the classroom, right? We've included them in mainstream education. They are in there. And it's like, okay, they're in the classroom, but are they participating in the activities, or are you just saying they're included? And those are two different things, and I see it a lot. And it's just something.
I mean, not to like go a little bit, we just need to also caution the fact that like special education in and itself is not integration, because that's a separate experience. So I think it's really important to frame this discussion that access does not guarantee equity. So like, because you have access to a space doesn't mean that it's an equitable experience.
Mhm.
So special education is not mainstreamed in the sense of, right, that's not like, that would be more of a segregated environment, right? That's not what we're going towards. If they're going to give support when you're in a general education classroom and pull out and do things like that, then we would caution about like, why are they pulling out? Can they design it so that your child could stay in the mainstream classroom throughout? And a lot of this comes down to options. We've been sold the lie that, we can only do things one way, and and this quote unquote normal way to do things. But if we provided options in the classroom, in the spaces, more people are likely to participate.
So it's really about being included and embracing that community aspect. We've hit a lot of these points, but it refers to disabled people being able to live in their local communities and participate and be active members of their societies. So living on their own, in their own homes, going to work, going to school, all of the things that, make up what it is to live in your community. And I think for children who are younger, it's really about looking at what do they want to do or be involved in, and what does that look like for them. And there are those opportunities if we are proactive about granting them, right? But we have to be aware. Go ahead.
I also think we have to acknowledge that barriers exist within the community. As they exist, right? Disabled people are navigating a world that's not made for them. So it's all fine and dandy to say, yeah, we need to live in our home, on our own or in our homes, but we need access to affordable and accessible housing in order for that to happen. And so sometimes people think that like advocacy on barriers or integration like doesn't have to happen until the child's older because they don't need affordable housing now, so I don't really care. But caring like 5 minutes before they need affordable housing is too late. It's too late. So you want to get involved in advocacy initiatives that support disabled people living in their community early. You want to take your children to events that are advocating for things like access and work opportunities. I always hear this, well, my child's not working, so I don't know about that. Like who cares? But they eventually will work, right? In some way, whatever that looks like for them, right? So it's really important to get involved in these things.
And we'll touch on this with the advocacy piece too, but I think it connects to community integration in the way that those barriers Tony was discussing, there are so many of us, even in our own communities, and I was guilty of this for a very long time, that see the barrier and they're like, well, that's just how that goes. Can't do anything about that. And so really advocating and getting out there to say like this isn't equal or equitable and what can we do about it is important.
I also think that I see parents do this all the time, and my parents did this too, right? Like, if things weren't physically accessible, and I'm using that experience because I'm a wheelchair user, um, we still went, and my parents adapted. But I would encourage you to seek out and support organizations that are accessible, because and go to restaurants that prioritize accessibility. Because when you take your child to an inaccessible location and you just make it okay, that sends them the message that their needs are secondary and that the non-disabled person will just, again, it's promoting this non-disabled savior. The non-disabled will come in and save the day and make it accessible. And you have to start that young because it's important. And it also, whether they have the language for this or not, when they see things that are not accessible for them and they constantly need help with that to navigate that, it sends them the message that they're not a priority, that it wasn't designed for them. So seek out, just like you would support other organizations and restaurants and businesses that support LGBTQIA plus rights or any other social justice rights, do that for disability too. Don't go back to the restaurant that continuously doesn't have a ramp 31 years after the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's no need for that. And yeah, sometimes is that frustrating? Yeah, but we also don't want to keep promoting that. And I understand because whenever I bring this up, I always hear, well, I was already at the restaurant. And I get that there's a time and a place where you can't always redirect. But when you can redirect, I've been in enough. Don't go to the restaurant that has the ramp in the back alley with the garbage, right? That's not an equitable experience. Any of you, a lot of the ramps are inaccessible places are not in the greatest locations, right? And again, I'm not asking you, if your favorite taco place is not accessible, I'm not asking you to give that up, but then I'm asking you to think about, you know, getting involved with changing that and not just, again, yes, disabled people are experts, but we can't do this work alone. We need non-disabled allies like our parents to help us fight these battles because the world is not made for us. So whenever, some people use this, well, I was waiting for the disabled person to complain or do it. That's not what we mean as disabled persons, as the experts. All of us, just like other social justice initiatives, we all have to get involved to change society, right? The same thing is true for disability. It's not just up to the disabled people to call up and complain about an inaccessibility. It's not up to the disabled person to speak to a manager.
And I think it's important when we add to that too, and Tony and I have seen this even in our friendship, even though we are both wheelchair users. I think because a lot of you on the call or listening to this are going to have kids with different disabilities that create different barriers. And I think that speaks to the fact that we really, when we look at, integrating into our community and doing these things, we need to look at the disability community as the whole disability community.
Not a
Because just
monolith.
because one barrier doesn't affect your child, there'll be another one that does. And we all need to work together to make sure disability as a whole is included.
Yeah, and so a good example, because we give a lot of poor examples, because they're, but recently there's been a lot of attention to making playgrounds more accessible for diverse learners, for people with disabilities, for people that like to interact in different ways, right? And one of the keys to what makes it inclusive is that there are options, right? There are options with how to interact with the playground. There's not just like, okay, there's a slide that has 3 steps. There's options. There's a place where there's a 0-step entry so that a wheelchair user could get up. There's a place to interact with your hands with some of the the apparatuses or whatever. So thinking sometimes about options and thinking about, and I know, right, like at some point you just want to be thinking about your own child and like what your own child could do, and that's a start, right? But remembering that your child is going to mingle outside of spaces when you're not around, right? And you don't know what they're going to encounter. So it's not even about fighting each barrier, but exposing your child to that process early on so they understand like what their rights are. So I'm not asking you to call up, like the disability justice office every time there's like a, no, but I'm asking you to explain to your child that, this shouldn't be happening 31 years after we have, a law that says that we have access to our community.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say before I move on to advocacy, obviously, we could talk about this for a while, but I think it's important in the sense that the barriers that, you're facing, like, just know that we're speaking to this out of experience. So, like, I've had the parents that were like, well, that doesn't affect you, so we're good. And I've educated them now that I've been more educated to be like, but it affected my community. And
right.
I want, we should care about that.
I think also too, Gabby and I becoming friends also kind of exposed our lens a little bit because I'm a manual wheelchair user and I am an ambulatory wheelchair user. So I sometimes walk and Gabby does not. And I think I have the agency to say that. If I don't, please.
You do.
But that's opened my eyes and I realized many a times like things that were accessible for me were not accessible for Gab, or things that were accessible for Gab, like for example, a pumpkin patch, she could get over the hay no problem. I'm stuck, miles away. Right. And so thinking about those things and, understanding that just like your non-disabled kids, right? Like your children are going to have friends from all walks of life with different experiences and things. And so it's really important. And again, I know some of you are like thinking like, how is like, but my child's like 5. This feels like a lot to take on. It is. I'm not selling it like a perfectly packaged bow because it's not. It's frustrating. It's annoying. It'll bring you to tears when your kid can't go to the birthday party that they were finally invited to because they've never been invited. Now they're invited and they can't go. You know how many birthday parties I was invited to where they had like those jungle gyms, couldn't do anything, right? And so like sometimes that's worse. Like we want to integrate, so then what? We're going to bring the kid to the thing that they can't interact at all. But I think it's really important that early on we expose children to advocacy and that we send the messages that even though you're getting messages every day based on design and attitudes that you don't belong, guess what you do? I mean, it was like just recently, I think 2020, maybe 2020, and don't quote me on this, but the first time there was a person with a physical disability on a Target ad, right? In 2020, guess what? Disability existed long before that. But if I seen that as a child, that would send me messages that the stuff in this store is for me too.
Yep.
So don't
100%.
lose sight of that. Buy your child the Barbie that comes with a wheelchair,
Yes.
that comes with a hearing aid, that, like, again, I'm not asking you to like suffocate them with only things like about disability, but that's part of their experience. So, and that sends messages about representation. Show them movies and read books that naturally infuse like disability. Don't wait and don't like be, again, I know I said this last week, but I need to say it again. You're not hiding anything if you don't say the word disability. They're gonna find out
Nope.
whether you tell them or not. So infuse it now. And when they tell you things like, oh, you know, I can't, I was in school and, you know, I couldn't do, you know, whatever somebody else was doing, acknowledge that. Don't
Yep.
say, I'm sure you tried really hard and you did it. Don't worry. No, acknowledge that they couldn't participate. I think sometimes we always like want to make it right. We want to make it sound good. We don't want to hurt them, but that actually prevents them from getting involved. So advocacy, right? It's and again, we have to move beyond this awareness, right? If I hear one more thing about disability awareness, if we're not aware that disability exists in 2021, we got a long way to go, right? We need awareness plus action, which then gets a change.
And I
So
think the other thing to mention as far as awareness is that an important barrier is I think a lot of people are aware that we've got a disability and that exists and we're here, but they don't want to acknowledge it.
Another thing
They're
is
not.
you're not like the best parent in the world if you wear blue for autism awareness. You got to look into who's guiding those organizations and what the purpose of that awareness is. I get so many messages in March because it's CP Awareness Month, and it's like, great, but give me access to my community. You want to wear the green shirt? Wonderful. I'm not going to wear it, but I'm not going to wear it because wearing a green shirt is not going to change. It's not going to like turn books into braille. Not going to do it. As Stella Young once said, right? Like, it's not going to happen, right? It's this needs change, right? And some of you are like, well, again, my child's like 7. What does this change look like? The change starts at like how you navigate your environment. Don't always put your kid in the situation where they have to go to their cousin's house and they have to crawl up the stairs to participate, because invite them to your house where you've manipulated the environment, right? Don't be like, oops, forgot their communication device. Don't worry, we're only having a couple-minute conversation. No. A couple-minute conversation without a communication device is majorly problematic. I hear this all the time. Well, we were just
problematic because they're not being given the option to participate.
Yeah, and if they don't want to participate, and I always hear this, I went back and I got the assistive device and they didn't use it. I don't care. But they definitely couldn't use it if it wasn't there. That's a definite, 100%, right? And the other thing is, like, if your child, for example, doesn't like to wear scratchy clothes or doesn't like to wear things with glitter or whatever it is, so then don't wear it. If your non-disabled kid didn't want to wear it, it would be no big deal. But with disability, it's like, well, I don't understand. They need to wear glitter. That's what everybody else. You've been sold that lie. Not everybody does the same thing. That's okay. Like that's okay. Like for me, when jeggings became a thing, I was like, okay, jeans every day, but I did not own a pair of jeans before then. And that has nothing to do, I mean, it may have to do with like accessibility of getting jeans on, but like, I don't know, my non-disabled sister, she wears leggings, right? Like, it's fine. So give your child your options. Don't force them into what we think is normal. And that is part of advocacy. You know, that is part of the process. Ask any questions. You know, again, we're not saying this to like burst your bubble. We're saying this because we wish some of this was said to our parents. We wish that we were exposed to some of this this before we were like adults, right, going to college. So it's really important. And I mean, advocacy could be, how many of you are parents and you get like letters about like the monthly, like send $5 in for, you know, awareness of this. You know, you could write to your school board and say, how about instead of doing a disability awareness, why don't we do a disability pride? Whoa. A couple of weeks ago, somebody sent me a message. My kid's school is doing disability awareness and they're so happy they thought about you. I was like, well, great. Good. I mean, it's nice that you're thinking about me. But again, we're aware, but we can't stay stuck in the awareness. And even though out of the funds that are tied to awareness, are they actually helping disabled people? Are we looking in the community or are they going somewhere else? Right? So before you just like, because one thing I did with my mom is that she's very eager to support anything disability, but I had to challenge her in terms of like when people reach out for support, don't just give support because the person's disabled. Figure out what they're using the money for. You don't need the money to go to the CEO, right? You need the money to go towards, you know, fixing the community. And here's the thing, even if it doesn't benefit your child, greater access will benefit your child in some way. And here's the thing, disability is fluid. So all because your child doesn't need it right now, today, on, what is it, Wednesday, they may need it on Friday. The things I needed as a child are completely different than what I need as an adult in the environment, right? And so it's really important. So I challenge you, because I see a lot of things about, you know, disability being the face of a charity. So don't just be like, well, I have a disabled child, so I'm going to support that. I want you to support things, but I want you to know where the money is going to. I want it to go to supporting actual quality of life and wheelchairs and things that are going to give tools to be able to be integrated in your community. So I always, my mom's like, I gave to this. I said, okay, where is it going to? And she knows at this point, she can't really tell me that she's given to anything unless she tells me where it's going. And I've had her call, I know, you're like, whoa. I've had her call up and retract because I'm like, nope, they gave you a message of a person that looks like your daughter, and it's not going to somebody that looks like your daughter, you know, because everybody uses disability for charity, you know, because it's looks great for charity. That's a joke. It's horrible. We're not objects of pity. And so you have to, those are small things that you can do. You can challenge. You don't have to just, and you could do it nicely. You don't have to. Advocacy could look like saying, actually, no, my child doesn't have special needs. My child's disabled. Everybody has needs. When we're talking about disability, we're not talking about abilities. Remove that from your brain. Everybody on this call, on Facebook Live, has different level of abilities regardless of disability. Some people are good cooks. I'm definitely not. But right, some people are excellent writers. That's where my strength is. Right. So you got it. Everybody has this. So thinking about that. Go ahead, Gab, because I went on a tangent and I feel like you should take it over.
That's right. You actually covered a lot of what we're looking at here. So, I mean, we've covered a lot of this in the examples, but what does that look like? It looks like you as a parent advocating for the needs of your kid. It looks like your child knowing their rights. This is a really, really, really important one when it comes to advocacy. I was way too old when I learned what the Americans with Disabilities Act was. Like, I'll just say I was like, I think I was in my teens. I don't even remember, but I was way too old. And I was like, wait a minute, there's a law that says I'm supposed to have the same access as everybody else. Now, whether or not the law is actually doing certain things is a whole nother issue, but the only reason the ADA is not holding up to what it should is because there's nobody enforcing it. And kids are part of the disability community. So they can be more people being like, well, it's actually my right that there be something here that I can access this, right? And they should be aware of what that looks like for them. And then, as we've said, like advocating for the rights of the community as a whole is super important. There were, and we'll give some examples when we get to the types of advocacy on the next slide, but a few years ago, Medicaid was under attack, and a lot of disabled people use Medicaid services to participate in their life every single day. Just because I didn't personally use it or your child doesn't use it for themselves doesn't mean that that going through would have affected so many people in our community who depended on those services to live their lives. And we need to start looking at that as a community effort. And then listening to yourself and your child. So not, like Tony said, not going to a place that's not, following the rules of the ADA or not adapted, and then just being like, well, this is, sending the wrong message, but we're already here, so we might as well just do it. Like, if
I can't tell you the amount of times I've been told, oh, don't worry, Tony can walk up a couple of steps. Don't assume what I could do, number one. Number two, like, it depends on the day. And number three, I don't know if I want to get out of my wheelchair. Is everybody else like getting out of their legs to go to the restaurant? I mean, I just don't understand. I don't understand. Yeah.
And then my favorite addition to that is like, we'll get somewhere, especially if you're with able-bodied people that can help you. And they all look at you and they're like, please don't say anything. Please, like, we've heard this already. Please, could we just not do this today? And I'm
Don't
like,
say anything, Tony. Don't say anything. Oh no. They don't know when they're telling me not to say anything. That is like, that is code for I'm gonna say something. Yeah.
I think it's important to be honest with the people watching this. That comes from our family. That comes from our parents. That comes from my siblings.
Yeah.
That comes from people that.
When I'm at a family party, people are always worried if somebody's going to say the wrong thing about disability because they know that I will educate, right? But it's like, well, too bad. If you're going to come to my house and use the wrong language, you bet I'm going to correct you. Or you bet I'm going to walk out if you're just using whatever. And sometimes we let things slide because it's only a comment. Oh, it's only the R word once. No, the R word is never okay. Even if it's not directed at your child, it can be. And if we don't stop it, or when somebody's like, oh, well, I parked in the handicap parking. If you don't correct it and say, you don't have to do it every single time, but you can't just, not see yourself as you're part of the solving the problem. You have to help us. We can't always be the ones. And I just want to say, you don't have to engage in advocacy every day. There's a time and a place to pick and choose your battles. Gabby and I do that every day. And, there's going to be some days where you have high energy to do that and some days that you don't. But when you can, I encourage you to do so. When you can go to the different restaurant or say to your friend, actually, we're not going to trick or treat at the street where the houses are like this. I don't know if you've seen on social media during COVID, they had all those Halloween shoots where they put the candy through. And then why is everybody getting rid of that now in 2021 when that provided so much access for disabled people is beyond me. Nobody in my family is getting rid of it if they've had it, right? So it's really important to think about. It's really important. This advocacy is even like something as simple as like when your child sees another disabled person in public and your inclination may be to pull them away. Natural curiosity is fine. If we send the message that they need to be scared of disability, what do you think happens? Right? So natural curiosity, great.
We could go in depth into all of these, and as you can tell, we're both really passionate about this topic because it's already 10:50. But this is just to highlight the different types of advocacy, and I think a lot of the examples that we've given fall into each of these, and this is just to illustrate that you don't have to, like Tony said, do all of this all of the time, right? There's different levels, there's different ways you can contribute. There's individual advocacy, so that would be your child, advocating for their need individually, or specific situation. Policy advocacy, so being aware of what's going on in your community, in the disability community, what legislation is happening right now that's either helpful or harmful to the disability community. We should be very aware of those things. Self-advocacy is just as it says, knowing how to advocate for yourself and your needs. And then there's activism. So advocacy on a bigger scale and a collective scale of
So systemic. So you're no longer looking at one individual problem. So you're taking it away from the individual level, and you're looking about if multiple people individually are having this problem, it's obviously a systemic barrier.
Yes. And then at that point, there needs to be systems that are changed. It's not just going to change for one person, but what can we do to change this for the community as a whole? So I think it's just important to be aware of what that looks like, and that can be done in different ways. This is just a quote that I really appreciate from Justin Dart. He's another really big player in the disability rights movement. And it says, we must demand that this community recognize in law and in fact that disability is a common characteristic of the human process. And this, people with disabilities have the rights and same responsibilities as other people. And I think we touched on this last week, but like disability is, you know, we are the largest minority. You can become disabled at any point in your life, whether you're born with it, or you acquire it through an accident, or you age into having a disability. And so we really need to, as he says, recognize it as a part of the common characteristic of the human process, as opposed to the other.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important. We have to think about it, right? Like, don't care about the curb cut until, you know, only when you need it.
This kind of just wraps it up, but the more we can implement the principles that Tony and I have talked to you guys about, the more we can highlight independence. And I think if, you know, all of these things work together, it creates more opportunities for children to be more independent. As we've said, that can be defined in different ways, but it should be a conversation that starts early and often, and they should be equal participants. It has, I'll speak for myself, even though I'm pretty sure I can speak for both of us when I say that it's changed my life to figure out how this impacts me and what it is to be a part of this community and really value independence and our worth and go for what you want. Right? Like things don't have to be so far out of your reach because you're disabled. It's doable, but it means community and resources and living by these principles every day in some form or another. So like I said, as you can tell, we are really passionate about this topic. Our contact info is on the first slide. It'll be put up with the webinar. There's other resources at Care for the Caregivers that we encourage you guys to look at and utilize, and we hope you enjoyed.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies, so much. This was really informative. I'm going to just open it up for questions. If any of the people who are watching live have questions, you can either unmute and ask or type them in the chat box. And I'm also monitoring Facebook Live. So if you all have any questions, you can put it in the comments.
And I'll just say quickly, the two of us are pretty open books. So if there's like something you want to know, ask it. We don't embarrass easily. And I use these as a way to really get information out there. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask. And if you want to do it privately, you can do that as well.
So, one of the things I just want to touch on that I loved what you guys had to say about advocacy is the importance of not just advocating for the disability that your child has, right? And I think that parents sometimes get stuck into these silos of, I'm an autism mom, I'm an autism dad. And it's like, that's the only thing I'm going to care about. Where really, I think we have to open ourselves up to making sure that everybody within our disability community has full and equitable access to everything. Because for some reason, we've started siloing off, I'm just going to advocate for Down syndrome stuff, or I'm just going to advocate for autism stuff. And it's like, we have to stop doing that. And we really have to make sure that we're
Time and a
advocating for the
place.
whole community.
Hmm. I think there's a time and a place. I mean, there's a time and a place to talk about individual that issues that impact a specific community, but we cannot solve it alone. We have to have allies in all communities. I think where those silos come from is that it started as a community to kind of share resources about X experience, which there's value in, but then we get siloed to, oh, this only matters for X. But like I said, when we have greater access for people with disabilities, we have greater access for everybody, whether they're disabled or not. Options, flexibility, multiple ways to participate. I mean, that benefits everybody, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I see a
I,
lot of that.
yeah, me too. And I have a question about consumer control, because very often, and I've noticed this with therapists who work with my children, they can be very invasive of their space. They cannot respect their personal autonomy. And so we have rules, like you can't take things away from my son. You can't hold things from him. You can't do hand over hand without his permission, to make sure that he has some autonomy over what's happening. He gets to choose. He gets to choose if he wants to interact with that therapist and play their game. And if he doesn't, then they have to be more interesting, and they have to like get him to want him to play with them. Are there other things that you guys can think of, like that would be good ground rules for parents to have with therapists, so that their children aren't just taught that they follow instructions of the therapist when they're given to them, right? Because I feel like we start at a very early age teaching our children to be very obedient to people, and I don't like that. I'm just gonna say.
It's an important point for sure. One thing that comes to mind for me is like talking about what you want out of the therapy experience. I think we touched on this last week a little bit, but like I wish my OT spent less time teaching me how to tie my shoes, I think was the example, because I don't tie them anymore. But it took me until I was 30 years old to find a way to put my hair up. You can ask Tony because she put it up for me for a long time. So like just knowing that they have like a say and a conversation around like what's gonna benefit them and what they want to be able to do, I think is important.
I think it's also what you teach in your house and how much value they have. Like, do they have the freedom to tell you that something's uncomfortable or something's, not? And if you practice that freedom, you can encourage them to practice that when they're working with professionals. Like if something doesn't feel right or something is whatever.
Yeah, that right to an opinion and the ability to say no to things, right? We think is just so important in our family, that they can say no, and that if they say no, that has to be respected by whoever they're working with.
Yep.
And that's
Absolutely.
and that same level of respect would probably be true for non-disabled children, right? If someone came home and said, I don't like this because of X, we probably wouldn't continue to push them.
Right. And this is, a little bit of a more somber example, but there were a lot of times in my life after a surgery that I had, that I won't get into the specifics, but I was in a lot of pain, like a lot of pain. And I can't tell you how many providers said to me, oh, it can't hurt that bad. Oh, you have to do it because this is what's going to fit. Like, you have to do this. You don't have a choice. And looking back, it was like, no, I did have a choice. And I was telling you I was in a lot of pain because I was in a lot of pain. And so I think it's just instilling that idea of like, they also they know their body and what is capable of, and that should be respected.
Mhm. Yeah. So unfortunately,
Well,
I have to head to another meeting. So
no problem. Thank you so much, Dr. Saya and Dr. Fishy, for coming on and spending 2
Thank
days
you
with
guys
us.
for listening.
bye, everyone. Hope to stay
Bye,
in
you guys.
touch.
Bye.
Bye. We'll see you at the next webinar, caregivers. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for watching this webinar. For more educational webinars like this, go to careforthecaregivers.com.